Welcome to Franchise Focus 2025 AFC edition. I'm Theo Gremminger, and I'm thrilled to kick off this year's AFC edition of Franchise Focus by asking one simple question. What is the most important thing to know for fantasy football from every single team in the AFC? This ambitious project is led by our own editor-in-chief, Joe Dolan, and showcases the insights of some of your favorite names at FantasyPoints, including the guru, John Hansen, and film expert, Brett Whitefield, along with top voices from around the industry, such as Joe Marino from Locked On Bills and Nathan Zegura of the Cleveland Browns. Allow me to get us started with our first AFC team, the Baltimore Ravens.
What? Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
My most important question for the Baltimore Ravens in fantasy football this year is, can Derrick Henry maintain his level of play and chase history? Can Derrick Henry have the best season ever for a 31-year-old running back in NFL history? And with Henry, there's absolutely no signs of him slowing down. But history has been unkind to running backs this age historically in fantasy football. We've never seen a 31-year-old running back play a full season and average 20 PPR points per game. Priest Holmes was setting the fantasy world on fire in 2004, but only played in 8 games. He probably would have got there, but again, only played 8 games. In the same season, Curtis Martin now has the best, highest scoring season for a 31-year-old running back of all time. You go back to 2004, Curtis Martin on the Jets, the same age as Derrick Henry, averaged 19.9 points per game. The last running back, the most recent running back to sort of sniff 20 points per game, was Raheem Mostert. And in 2023, he averaged 17.5 points per game. So guys have come close, but they haven't hit 20 points per game. This past offseason, we saw the Baltimore Ravens reward Derrick Henry with a 2-year contract extension, extending his shelf life in Baltimore in what turned out to be an absolutely perfect fit alongside Lamar Jackson last year in the Baltimore Ravens backfield. Henry had the second most rushing yards in his entire career in a single season, went over 2,000 yards in 2020, came close last year, had 1,921 rushing yards. And in terms of other rushing statistics, he was just phenomenal. He had his highest yards per carry average of his career with 5.8 a game last year. The second most rushes in the NFL to go over 20 yards, trailing only Saquon Barkley in that category. And he tied a career high with 18 touchdowns last year. The Ravens offense could be even better this year. This is year 3 of the Todd Monken, Lamar Jackson pairing, and Monken has just been fantastic as an offensive coordinator. Derrick Henry is being drafted right now inside of the second round in leagues like Underdog, leagues like the FFPC and the NFFC. Drafters are enthusiastic about him, but if he can take a step forward from last year, in year 2 in Baltimore, if Henry can be just slightly more proficient, then he's going to set an all-time NFL record in points per game. Henry was at 19.8 points per game last year as a 30-year-old, played in 17 games, and is showing no signs of slowing down. The Ravens offense could be even better this year. Don't miss out on Derrick Henry possibly setting a NFL high in fantasy football for points per game from a 31-year-old running back.
Joe, Josh Allen's the reigning NFL MVP, and when you think of a reigning NFL MVP quarterback, you normally like to, for fantasy purposes at least, target some of the players that guy is throwing to. But I've been sitting here doing the dozens of drafts that I've been doing, And I'm not really sure which Bills receiver is all that appealing from a fantasy football perspective. To me, it just looks like they've kind of swapped out Amari Cooper for Josh Palmer. What can you tell me about this receiving group? Is there reason for fantasy football optimism, really for anyone beyond Khalil Shakir, who, as we know, isn't the highest ceiling type of guy?
Well, it's a good distinguishment between real-life football and fantasy football.
Mm-hmm.
You could talk all about these skill sets that the Bills have at wide receiver and discuss the complementary nature and the different ways that the Bills can attack an offense, but that doesn't help you solve the puzzle of targets and yards and touchdowns and which one of these guys to go after. It feels like the only thing I feel certain about is that Khalil Shakir is going to get the most targets. He had 100 last year. He came on down the stretch in 2023, and so I think he'll be the go-to receiver relative to the Buffalo Bills, but you can throw darts. You can convince me that Keon Coleman's going to challenge for 90 targets. You can convince me that Josh Palmer is going to get a lot of opportunity. Elijah Moore is a player that I'm not sleeping in on. But outside of Khalil Shakir, it feels like it's going to be a challenging puzzle to figure out. It's good for real football and the challenges that defenses will have figuring out who they want to key in against the Bills, but not so great for the fantasy side of things.
I want to follow up on Keon Coleman because he was essentially a first-round pick. I mean, right at the beginning of the second round, was clearly a player that the Bills had targeted. What did you like about his rookie season? What do you think he needs to improve upon to really take that next step as their top outside receiver?
I like how the rookie season started. He got injured in week 9 against the Miami Dolphins, and I was a Keon Coleman doubter coming out of Florida State, but he inspired me in the first half of the season with the plays that he made with the ball in his hands. Very good yards after catch profile, which check out the Fantasy Points data suite. You'll see that Keon Coleman was great in missed tackles forced, yards after contact per reception, yards after the catch per reception. And that told a good story. It set up some things for him to get down the field and win some of those 50-50 battles. And Josh Allen, we know he likes to get off script. And whenever he does that, Keon Coleman's a player that he looks for. And you saw some nice completions in that capacity. But when he came back from injury, he was just not the same. And a big part of that was the offense changed a bit while he was out. And when he came back, he pretty much was a go ball merchant. Over 30% of the routes that he ran, according to the Fantasy Points data suite, were go routes. And he had the lowest separation score in the league on go routes. And so his role really changed. They would sometimes just kind of throw up a 50-50 pass to him. But I think they have to get back to that complete profile of how they deploy Keon Coleman to maximize his output, because he doesn't have the vertical skills to be a goal ball merchant.
Let's hit on a little bit of dynasty here, because obviously James Cook, with the 47,000 touchdowns he scored last year, really increased his dynasty profile. Is there any reason to worry, if you have James Cook in a dynasty league, that a contract is not going to get done with him?
Well, he'll play for somebody in 2026 and he'll get paid to do it. I'd be concerned about that touchdown production being replicatable. I think it was an outlier season. Nothing like the previous 2 years. Now, his goal line carries did go up quite a bit, but I don't expect him to replicate the touchdown production, which was a huge part of his fantasy profile. It wasn't yards, right? He had to play in a meaningless game in week 18 against the Patriots to get his 19 more yards to get over 1,000 for the season. So if you're banking on touchdown production, I think that would be something I'd be concerned about, because I don't think he's going to replicate the 16 rushing touchdowns that he had in 2024.
Somebody who watches every snap of every Bills game on an analytical level the way you do, where do you stand on Dalton Kincaid?
All the way in. This guy has a proven route running profile. He has a proven yards after catch profile. The biggest thing for Dalton Kincaid is that he's got to establish better chemistry with Josh Allen. According to the Fantasy Points data suite, only 37% of his targets that were 10 or more yards down the field were catchable. That's unacceptable. He had the lowest catchable target rate among qualifying tight ends in the NFL. But he had the highest amount of targets per route run of any tight end in the NFL. The Bills want to get the ball to Dalton Kincaid. He battled injuries all year long in year 2. He had a historically great rookie season. No matter how you spin it, a top 10 all-time rookie season in terms of production, receiving production for a tight end. Didn't meet expectations last year, which disappointed a lot of people, right? A lot of people were thinking that he's going to gobble up the Stephon Diggs targets. He's the first-round pick. There's going to be a lot of volume his way. And to some degree there just wasn't enough success with the Josh Allen, Dalton Kincaid hookup. I think they both know how important this year is going to be. Obviously a 5th-year option decision to be made on Dalton Kincaid after the season. a lot of motivation, right? He dropped the 4th and 5 pass that would have put the Bills in position to win the AFC Championship game. And so I think there's a lot riding on this season. And the skill set is the skill set. The guy can run routes. He's got great hands. He's got great yards after catch ability. He's just got to get synced up with Josh Allen and take that next step.
Hey, what's going on? I'm John Hansen, and when it comes to the Cincinnati Bengals and my most important fantasy football question, I did consider several areas. I am intrigued by the young receiving core, especially Jermaine Burton. Pretty good vibes thus far. He might be a sneaky big play threat in the offense. Andre Yosevich doing his best to stay on the field. Mike Gesicki back this year, so they are in pretty good hands. O-line is going to be a concern. Orlando Brown, at least left tackle, is something of a stabilizing force, but we do have a couple of new starters here, a rookie in Dylan Fairchild and Lucas Patrick, who was just adequate last year. One big key would be former number 1 pick Armarius Mims out of Georgia. Would be nice if he stepped up, especially in the run blocking department. That is supposed to be his deal, which leads me to my actual most important question with the Cincinnati Bengals. It's pretty obvious. And the question is, can Chase Brown be the guy and a bell cow basically for them for the entire season? Because if he can, then we're looking at an unbelievable buying opportunity this year with Chase Brown. Last year, only RB14 in fantasy points per game, but let's not forget, first 3 games, something of a non-factor. From week 4 on, my man was RB6 in fantasy points per game, 49 grabs, 4 receiving touchdowns. You know, the data, it's okay. It worked out, by the way, from week 4 on, 16 and a half carries a game and 3.7 receptions a game. So we're kind of flirting with dare I say, a CMC light like role here for the Cincinnati Bengals. 18th in explosive run percentage out of 36 running backs with at least 100 carries. 14th in explosive yards, 16th out of 36, middle of the pack in missed tackles forced. So nothing great here data-wise here. He was not great in yards after contact. So it is a little bit of a volume-based situation here for Chase Brown. But hey, I've been around him. By the way, great guy. Interviewed him at the Combine. I've said this a few times since that interview a couple of years ago. Couldn't believe how jacked up he was. I watched him at the Senior Bowl. He's got a lot of juice, a lot of quickness. Not exactly a foundational running back. You're not going to start your offense with him in the running game per se, but I do think clearly he is their primary running back, because when you look at the depth chart here, it is absolute skank, quite frankly. Behind him, Zach Moss hanging on by a thread. Love Samaje Perine. He is very good pass protector. He'll probably chip away at Chase Brown's PPR upside a little bit here. Taj Brooks is a rookie to keep an eye on, but a bell cow role awaits here for Chase Brown. This is an offense that had 380 rushing attempts last year. Not too shabby, 11 rushing touchdowns. So we're looking at a really, really nice potential fantasy asset at his current ADP, by the way. I have my own set of rankings up at FantasyPoints.com. I have personally moved him up to RB9. But right now here, early stages of training camp in July, he's like RB13 off the board. Beyond round 2 as well, like 28 overall. If you can get Chase Brown in the early stages of round number 3 as an RB1 or an RB2, I mean, he'd be a good RB1. He'd be an unbelievable RB2. That might, be thievery. And we like that for fantasy football. So my biggest question is about Chase Brown, but I don't have that many questions. By the way, they did let Frank Pollock go, their offensive line coach last year. The new guy coming in here, Chase Brown, energized by the scheme. It's the same scheme that he ran in Illinois, a lot of quick hitters in the running game, which is good for Chase Brown. So I'm looking at a great target here with this player in round number 3.
Nate, obviously the Browns have a much publicized quarterback battle heading into training camp. What's your first vibe on that from OTAs and mini camps?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you again. Secondly, it's unique to have actual a four quarterback competition for the Browns starting quarterback job in 2025. You got the veteran Joe Flacco, who had that magical run with the Browns a couple of years ago, where he went 4-1 in his five starts, threw for 300 yards every game. He's not getting a ton of reps, and I think that's partially because they kind of know what they've got in Joe Flacco. You got Kenny Pickett, who's 15-10 as a starter, which, by the way, this will be my 13th season with the Browns. That would make him the winningest quarterback to wear a Browns uniform while I have been there. 15-10, seven fourth quarter comebacks. Was probably in an awful offensive situation in Pittsburgh. I mean, it was pretty much regarded as the worst coordinated offense in the NFL in the time that he was there. And then you got the two draft picks, Dylan Gabriel and Shador. Shador obviously has a lot of fanfare, extremely accurate. I think he's got a pretty big learning curve in terms of all the things an NFL quarterback is asked to do that maybe he was not asked to do there in Colorado. And then there's Dylan Gabriel, who started more games in college football than anybody. He's thrown for more touchdowns in college football than anybody, has been productive everywhere that he has been. He is the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year. And I'll tell you what, Stefanski loves him. He's a guy who got a lot of reps. And the way that kind of, if you read it just from reps and starter-ish reps, Pickett and Gabriel got the most of those throughout this offseason portion. And I think that ultimately they are going to want to get, Kenny Pickett. I think he'll get the first look. The first 6 weeks, it's a murderer's row. It's a tough open for anybody, let alone if you're a rookie quarterback trying to start your career. So my guess is it'll probably be Pickett. I think he would be kind of the leader in the clubhouse. And then Flacco to me is kind of the break glass in case of emergency guy who, and just terrific human being. I couldn't love that he's back with our organization anymore, but that's the kind of the way I see it. And I'd say Gabriel's ahead of Shador for now, and then we'll see how that goes.
When you have a quarterback competition like that, whether it's a rookie or somebody like Kenny Pickett, who's never really been asked to drop back 50 times a game, the run game is very important. It's always been important with Kevin Stefanski. Now, the Browns replacing a franchise legend in Nick Chubb. Quinshon Judkins is being tasked with that. They also drafted Dylan Sampson. What are your impressions of Quinshon Judkins? What have the coaching staff said about him? Do you think he can be that bell cow back that we like for fantasy so much?
Yeah, and I think even when Nick Chubb, and we're certainly going to miss him in Cleveland, when he was the bell cow, it was, oftentimes Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. And there was kind of a duo there. I think that Quinshon Judkins absolutely will get every opportunity to be in that kind of Nick Chubb role where he's going to touch the ball, 15 to 20 times. I think he will be the goal line back. He's a tremendous touchdown scorer, whether it was in the SEC or whether when he went to the national champions with Ohio State. He's the real deal. You can just see it. He absolutely looks the part. Deuce Staley's having a lot of fun with him. The Browns are very high on him. We will run the heck out of the football. As long as we can be in what I would call neutral to positive game scripts, we're going to run the heck out of football. This is going to be a running football team, and Quinshon Judkins, I think, will be the lead in that. Jerome Ford, I think, is probably likely going to be the third down back. And he had a nice year last year, averaged over 5 yards carry. He's got home run ability. And then there's Dylan Sampson. Taking Dylan Sampson in the third round, had the third round unfolded differently. Even with their first third round pick, had it unfolded differently. They love Dylan Sampson. They could not believe that Dylan Sampson, the SEC Offensive Player of the Year, was available to them where he was in the fourth round. And so I don't think they expected to come out of it with two running backs, but when that happened, they did. We've seen in minicamp and even in the OTAs, Sampson and Judkins in the backfield together. Especially in some shotgun situations, getting one of them in motion, and having all those kind of RPO type options with the two of them. I like it. I think obviously from a fantasy standpoint, Judkins is the one that you want. He is going to get every opportunity to be that guy.
We have a stat that we chart at Fantasy Points Data, Nate, called first read target share. And you might be surprised to know that in games that they were active together, Cedric Tillman outpaced Jerry Jeudy in that statistic last year. Now, obviously, the quarterback position is going to be very different, but this is a guy we've kind of identified as a high upside sleeper from a fantasy football perspective. What are your impressions of Cedric Tillman, and how does the coaching staff feel about him?
Man, he's got great size. He's got great speed. Was very productive in the SEC, over 1,000 yards at Tennessee, over 17 yards a catch. Played very well against the best competition. You go back, watch his tape against Alabama, against Georgia, had huge games against both of them. Slow start in his rookie year. Last year it got going, and I know those numbers that you're citing, those came with Jameis Winston, and our passing attack got going a little bit. And he had a 3-game stretch where he was like top 10 in targets, catches, and yards. And so you saw what he was able to do. I know the Baltimore game where he had the winner there, that was part of that 3-game stretch, but then he gets hurt with the concussion and we didn't see him the rest of the year. And then he was kind of in and out this offseason. So Cedric Tillman to me has everything you want of a legit, kind of number 2 receiver in the NFL, maybe a fantasy number 3 receiver or better to those stats that you pointed out, but he's got to stay on the field. Coaches love him. He's a very hard worker. He's a confident kid. Like I said, great size, speed combination, good catch radius. They like him a lot. And I think Deontay Johnson, was brought in and he can still run routes. I mean, it's very apparent. It's just, will last year's kind of troubles be behind him? He's a Pro Bowl receiver. So I think those are kind of the guys that you're looking at in that room. I like Tillman a lot. He's got to stay on the field. If he does that, I think that he could be productive. I think the Browns are going to be in a lot of 12 personnel, though. And I think a lot of times that third receiver is really going to be Harold Fannin, the tight end they drafted out of Bowling Green, who had over 1,500 yards last year, was good against when he played at Penn State, Texas A&M, played great against the MAC Offensive Player of the Year. I think there's going to be a lot of times where we come out to 12 and he's kind of playing that big slot, and you got Tillman on the outside and Judy on the outside.
The Broncos' backfield has been a source of many headaches over the last 2 years, and we now have 2 new players to try and sort out in this backfield. They moved up to select R.J. Harvey in the second round of the NFL draft, and they just signed J.K. Dobbins to a 1-year veteran deal worth $2 million guaranteed. Now, J.K. Dobbins has never really been a player we're, projecting to have a big role in the passing game. That role should fall to R.J. Harvey. Dobbins certainly hurts Harvey's floor, but I don't think the addition of the veteran Dobbins really hurts the rookie's ceiling. The Broncos had 95 receptions as a running back group last year. That was the 4th most, and the year prior, they had a whopping 131 team receptions, leading all backfields. In his career, J.K. Dobbins averages just 8.9 receiving yards per game. Now, he certainly could have a third down role as a pass protector while the rookie gets up to speed, but the general manager for the Broncos, George Patton, was saying after the draft that, listen, we think he has a lot of great instincts in the passing game. He had a lot of big plays. We see a ton of upside here. And for our game, for fantasy, that's exactly what we want to hear. We know R.J. Harvey is an extremely talented runner. With 5.7 yards created per carry, he graded behind only Ashton Jeanty in yards created per carry in this class. And he's got this huge out with his receiving upside because that's really never been Dobbins' game. Last season, Dobbins had 2 great games to start his season in weeks 1 and 2, ironically against 2 of the worst run defenses in the league in the Carolina Panthers and the Vegas Raiders. Overall, Dobbins was just meh. I mean, he had 195 carries, ranked 28th out of 46 running backs in yards after contact per carry. He was also 27th in missed tackles forced per carry. He's still a good running back, but it doesn't really change the ceiling here for Harvey. We want him eventually taking over as the passing down running back. Let's not forget, Javonte Williams ranked 7th among all running backs last year in target share. He had 70 targets last season. Like if you had a trivia of who was 5th among running back targets last year, guarantee you probably wouldn't have thought it was Javonte Williams, but it was. That's just what this offense is. It's a West Coast offense that's designed to, kind of have a lot of play action reads, a lot of quick design reads with underneath concepts that kind of get these checkdowns. And for fantasy, it's super valuable. And now RJ Harvey is going to step into that role. I think the only thing we can really say safely here with this Broncos backfield is that Harvey is going to get cheaper to draft because of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt around Dobbins. But in my opinion, he is still the highest ceiling player in this backfield, and I want to draft him at this cheaper cost. It is RJ Harvey to the moon.
Cody, Joe Mixon had a really good first season with the Texans last year, and obviously Dameon Pierce didn't fit all that well in Bobby Slowick's offensive scheme. Nick Caley's the new offensive coordinator, and he's coming in from kind of the Mick Shanahan background, and he's going to have a little bit more of a diverse run scheme. What does that mean for Joe Mixon, who's also been in a walking boot in kind of OTAs and mini camps? And what does that mean for some of the guys who have been added to this backfield, like Woody Marks and Nick Chubb?
Well, for Joe Mixon, it means as much as Joe Mixon would like to run the football, they'd love to run the football. I mean, D'Amico Ryans, as defensive coaches typically do, preaches that they're going to run the football. And the way the Texans are built are to get a lead and then grind you out with the rushing attack and just unleash hell with their defense. Like, that's the way they're built. So as much as Joe can handle, Joe can have it. He's the best running back by a wide margin on this team. He's the only running back I trust on this team. And maybe there's some third down duties that get assigned out to Woody Marks or Daria Gumbawale. But if Mixon's healthy, Mixon's the guy. Mixon's getting the bulk of everything. Nick Chubb is really on this team as break glass in case of emergency. Because if you don't have Joe Mixon, you couldn't turn to anybody else that was on the roster to be that one-for-one replacement. Chubb should get that opportunity. And if he's 70% of what he used to be, that's better than all the other guys that the Texans had before they brought Chubb in. So I'd say Chubb is a running back 2 only if Joe Mixon is not playing, and then he actually takes over running back 1 duties.
Dameon Pierce, obviously kind of the forgotten man here. It felt like they tried to get him a role, and he ended up being actually a pretty good kick returner for the Texans. Is he still on the outside looking in?
It's never good when the general manager mentions you by name and then talks about how good you are at special teams when you're a running back. That's not good. That's what happened to Dameon Pierce this past offseason. It just never clicked for Dameon Pierce after his rookie season, and he's fighting an uphill battle to make this team and have a role in the running back room. If he does make the team, it's probably because that kickoff return ability is just too good. They can't pass it up.
Well, help me unjumble the wide receiver logjam here for the Texans. Now, obviously, they went all out last year to try to support C.J. Stroud. Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell both get hurt. You can't really predict that. But they go younger this year. They draft the 2 Iowa State guys, clone to the bone, Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins. They also trade for Christian Kirk. What do you expect it to look like behind Nico Collins here in terms of target distribution?
I expect them to trust Christian Kirk as long as he's healthy. I mean, when he's been healthy, he's been a productive wide receiver in the National Football League. And Nick Caley's history, you think about time in LA, and then before that, time in New England, they love slot wide receivers where he's been. Well, what's Christian Kirk going to be for the Texans? He's going to be the slot receiver. And how do you avoid putting your quarterback in danger? You win quick and you get open. And that's what Kirk can do. So you get rid of the football quick because you still have a shaky offensive line. Kirk, to me, is the guy behind Nico Collins until it's proven otherwise. Yes, Jaden Higgins looked really good in a couple of OTAs, minicamp practices. There's still that growing pain that's going to happen. I mean, this guy is not a finished, ready-made, ready-to-go product. You can see how they're going to use him initially, but Kirk's the guy right after Nico Collins. He's probably going later in most people's fantasy drafts than he should. And you know what? Just maybe, for the first time in franchise history, the Texans will have 2 1,000-yard receivers.
Jacob, I think one of the big questions, especially for best ball drafters and maybe dynasty players right now, is what the hell do we do with the Colts quarterback situation and Anthony Richardson? Man. I mean, it's like Anthony, he's one of the hardest players to project because when he starts, you're probably going to project him as a top 10 quarterback. But there's a chance he doesn't start any games at all this year. What's your read on the situation?
So I think that Daniel Jones is the very heavy favorite to start week 1. I thought that was the case pretty much from when he signed, but that has become increasingly the case over the course of summer. We got, I thought, a lot of quotes from Shane Steichen about valuing consistency, wanting the quarterback who moves the sticks more than just the explosive plays. Was something he brought up a lot, and specifically said whoever is the most consistent quarterback will be the starting quarterback. That, to me, felt like a direct shot against what they got out of Richardson last year. Then, of course, Anthony Richardson suffers the injury in the early summer. That gives Jones an extended portion of time to act as the clear number 1 uncontested at that point. And he's, by all accounts, played reasonably well. I think that he's probably an 80% chance to start week 1 at this point. That being said, he's Daniel Jones. So I think that whoever starts week 1 is by no means guaranteed to start the entire rest of the season. And in some ways, it makes Richardson a more attractive click to me now than he was at the beginning of the season. First of all, because he's free and he's actually not drafted in every draft anymore. He used to go up in the 160s, 170s, which I thought was too high. And also, he can't get hurt or benched if he's not playing at the beginning of the season. So you might be able to just get him coming in at the kind of right time, finish really strong. And the last thing I'll say is when Richardson started at the beginning of last year, of course, at that time, the hope was he's the quarterback of the future. He's going to be the Colts quarterback for a very long time. They really were adamant about not using him as much in the design running game as they probably should have if they were optimizing for wins. When he got benched and he came back, I think their attitude was much more, screw it. We don't know if this guy's our future anyways, so let's just run him. Let's just do what we can do best. And that kind of worked. He was a lot better. He then, of course, eventually got hurt again. I think that's the same idea this year. Any games that he plays, they're going to be doing whatever they can to, frankly, save their jobs and to make this offense as viable as possible with him. That means giving him 10, 12 designed rush attempts every single game. And that's, of course, gold for fantasy.
So now let's presume Daniel Jones does start and starts most of the year, and you get the more consistent passing game that they want, the chain mover. What I think we're looking at here from a fantasy football perspective is a receiving group that is kind of similar to that of the Green Bay Packers. We're just not really sure which, we know it's a talented group, but we're just not really sure which guy is going to have the most consistent value. What are the names you find yourself clicking the most at ADP for the Colts based on what you think their role is going to be?
Yeah, the two guys that jump out to me is just two of the biggest values on Underdog. And look, I am not a Colts homer when it comes to fantasy. There's some years I'm in on certain Colts. There's some years I'm in on none of them. I'm almost never in on all of them. But Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, to me, are just, simply put, way better football players than the majority of the wide receivers that they go up against. Josh Downs, third-year wide receiver. So far in the league, he's been an elite target earner per route. And then you look at Pittman. I've never even been a Michael Pittman guy. I think he's kind of blah. I think at times he's been overrated because he kind of earns volume but adds very little to it beyond that. But this is a professional wide receiver who consistently, when he's not playing with a broken back, earns 25% target shares in his sleep. And he's going next to a bunch of rookies and barely in front of guys like the Rashid Shaheed, Rashad Bateman kind of tier. He's just way better than these dudes. I think they're going to have a normal-ish offense with Daniel Jones that looks pretty similar to like the Gardner Minshew offense 2 years ago. And Michael Pittman came off of that season and was a round 3 pick the next year. So I think that these are both guys that are really undervalued. The other thing I'll say for Downs, look, I don't understand why the Colts do what they do with him, but they never play him in 12 personnel. They play Alec Pierce there, and if he, for whatever reason, was to lose that role, I think he's more likely to lose it to Adonai Mitchell. But how often they play in 11 personnel really dictates Josh Downs' ceiling. Last year, there was this catch-22, where when they had Richardson in, they would play 11 personnel on almost all their passing snaps. But of course, Anthony Richardson is really limiting as a quarterback. They go to Joe Flacco. Big improvement for Josh Downs, of course, on a play-to-play basis. But they had to play a lot more 12 because you can't run the ball very effectively if you're playing 11 personnel with a 180-pound slot receiver and a quarterback who can't move. It's just you're just not credible in the running game. So I think having Daniel Jones or A-Rich this entire year, they're going to have a mobile quarterback. They can build their run game off the read option, which is what Shane Steichen likes to do. That's going to allow them to play an 11. And then you've got Tyler Warren now, who I actually don't think is a great value for fantasy himself, but I think is a big addition to the Colts offense, where he's going to be playing, I think, almost every down in 11 personnel as a tight end who can block, who can also catch passes. And I think that's going to have a nice effect for Downs in terms of just getting him on the field more often.
John, fantasy football players love to try to find the next big thing. And while Jaguar fans think they have it in Travis Hunter, we'll get to him in a little bit. Obviously, Travis Etienne did not have the greatest of seasons last year. Tank Bigsby, after a disastrous first year, ended up having a pretty productive second year. But fantasy football players not enamored with either one of them. They've kind of gravitated to Bashul Tutin, the 4th-round pick. It's got some speed, maybe the new regime can get their guy in here. What are the chances that Bashul Tutin actually ends up leading this backfield in production?
I just think like this backfield, it gets a lot of comparisons, obviously, to the backfield Liam Cohen had in Tampa Bay with Bucky Irving, Rashad White. I think knowing that Etienne's there, I don't expect him to be moved, go anywhere. I mean, it would cost the team a draft pick plus they'd be paying him $6 million in the last year of his contract. Not an ideal situation for anybody to pick up. So I think between Etienne, Bigsby, and Tutin, I think there's legitimately a way for all three of them to kind of, in a way, eat into each other's snaps. Etienne has the experience nod over Tutin where one of the first things Liam Cohen said about Tuden during offseason practices was, somebody asked what stood out about him so far. And he was like, well, he fumbled today. So that just gives you an insight that he's kind of maybe has an old school mentality when it comes to turnovers. So that's one thing he has to clean up. But as long as he does clean it up, I wouldn't imagine ETN would be on a long leash in terms of being their passing down guy, in terms of being their guy who leads the zone-based running attack. It is a question, though, to me, like if their offensive line is just better at blocking for a runner like Tank Bigsby and on gap scheme runs, I could see Tank Bigsby leading the backfield. Liam Cohen told us right after he got hired that he went into Tampa last year wanting to be a zone running team, but the offensive line and Bucky Irving just thrived more on gap blocking. If that's the case in Jacksonville this year, and it remains to be seen, I think Tank Bigsby could have a chance to beat out both those guys.
The Jaguars signed Travis Hunter to his rookie contract, and they very cheekily put out 2 tweets that they've signed wide receiver Travis Hunter and defensive back Travis Hunter to his rookie contract. How much do you expect him to play on either side of the ball?
I'm not sure if I'd say absolute full-time player, both sides of the ball every single week, but I think he's going to see meaningful snaps on both sides of the ball every week. I think it'll obviously be adjusted as it comes to, specific game plans. Jaguars general manager James Gladstone kind of said that last week that, his role could look different week to week. And that's probably a big reason why they saw him as valuable enough to go up to number 2 overall, because having a player you can deploy to either receiver or cornerback on a given week if you see a mismatch is obviously a big advantage. But I think it's going to be, at least I'd say 70% or so snaps on both sides of the ball, probably. I think it's fair to say he's going to have a very big role on both sides of the ball, especially on offense. Just seeing some of the ways that they were using him on offense, or he practiced most of the time during the offseason program, I definitely think he's going to have a big impact on Liam Cohen's offense.
So let's just presume health with Brian Thomas and the whole offense in general. Do you think Travis Hunter's second on the team in targets?
I do think so. I think that they're still going to spread the ball out a good bit. They obviously signed De'Ami Brown over the course of free agency. He stood out during the offseason, drew a lot of praise from Liam Cohen. Britton Strange is there, but I still think Travis Hunter, one way or another, is just going to demand those targets and command them, both because of the ways that he can be used. They can use him to kind of press a lot of the easy buttons in the offense, especially on screens. We saw how good Tampa Bay's screen game was last year. And just the fact that I think he'll get single coverage so often because of the significance and magnitude of a guy like Brian Thomas, that there's just going to be a lot of areas and opportunities for him to take advantage of.
We're not going to hold this against you. There's no actual stakes here. But if you had to wager right now, Travis Hunter plays a higher percentage of snaps on offense or defense, where would your wager go?
I'll go offense because I think the team probably values offense a little bit more, just offensive-minded head coach. Their EVP said throughout the entire draft process that their biggest need was guys who can score touchdowns. But I do think it will be close.
My biggest fantasy question this year with the Kansas City Chiefs is none other than Travis Kelce, the GOAT in terms of fantasy football tight ends, 35 years old. He will be 36 in the Super Bowl in the final year of a pretty big contract here, 2-year, $34 million contract. So they did opt to pay him this year. So it is a big year for, I believe, the legacy of Travis Kelce, because we all know about the little bit of the media circus with Taylor Swift. And he did look bad down the stretch last year, especially obviously in the Super Bowl. It was not a good look. However, I do believe that Travis Kelce is certainly a very proud guy, and he hears the chatter that his demise is upon us, and he has responded in the offseason. He's working out. He is slimmer and trimmer, which is absolutely good news. There's no indication that Andy Reid is going to kind of pull back from his usage. Look, at the end of the day, he's no longer the player that can be a foundation for the passing game. But here's the good news. I don't think he has to be, because for the first time in quite some time, a number of years, I'm looking at the Kansas City Chiefs depth chart, and I see 3 impactful players who kind of fit together pretty well. Rashee Rice there in the middle of the field, that zone beater type of a guy, the bigger receiver, inside receiver. Xavier Worthy certainly came on last year, and they used him in the gadgety ways that they did pretty effectively. And Hollywood Brown, I thought, looked tremendous. He's still only 28 years old. I thought he had a pretty good rapport with Patrick Mahomes. So maybe, just maybe, Travis Kelce is not a guy that defenses are homing in on as much as we've seen in the past. And maybe the three receivers on the field who are dangerous in their own right actually open things up for Travis Kelce. Let's not forget, Travis Kelce himself once gave me a good insight into his relationship with Patrick Mahomes in terms of the telepathy that they have, little hand signals and things like that. Great story. He just once told me that, you know, he had a little hand signal when the scramble drill occurred. And, you know, depending on the signal, Tyreek would go deep and he'd come in, or vice versa. So, and it worked out very, very well. So Mahomes still trusts Travis Kelce. If he is slim, trim, and ready to go, it's going to be a very good offense. So I do think, I'm not going to go there yet and say he's a very appealing target at his ADP. What's that? 4th, 5th round, but I'm not against it. And if the vibes are good this summer, I might actually be in to Travis Kelce. And let's not forget, we've been there for a number of years with the media circus. This is a legacy type of season for Travis Kelce. They're paying him the big money. It's like, what else do you need to prove, dude? He's going for one more run at glory at the Lombardi after last year's embarrassment. So if the vibes are good again on Travis Kelce, he might actually be a pretty damn good pick at 35 years old, soon to be 36.
One of the most exciting teams, dare I say it, the Las Vegas Raiders. And the biggest question mark for the Raiders is, are they going to be able to deliver on these immense expectations? And this is not a Geno Smith take, but this is really an overall offense take, where you have Ashton Genty, who is an absolute lock to go inside of the first round in pretty much every single format. We're seeing that on underdog drafts. We're seeing that in FFPC leagues. We're seeing that in the NFFC. Ashton Genty is one of the most hyped rookies heading into the season since really Saquon Barkley and Ezekiel Elliott. The steam for Genty is probably a little bit more so than we saw for Bijan Robinson heading into his rookie season. Genty has been an absolute lock, going off the board inside the first round in every single league. Then you add to that Brock Bowers, and Brock Bowers was unbelievable last season, essentially gave you one of the greatest seasons of all time from a rookie pass catcher in NFL history, set the record for receptions by a rookie, breaking Puka Nakua's record, and doing so at the tight end position at 21 years old was absolutely exceptional. We are all over Brock Bowers at Fantasy Points, and for good reason. And drafters everywhere are echoing our enthusiasm levels. In Underdog and NFFC, Bowers is easily the first tight end off the board. But if you go to FFPC with the tight end premium scoring, Bowers is going somewhere inside the top 5 to 7 selections overall. So you're talking about two players collectively in Ashton Genty and Brock Bowers on an offense with a new coordinator, a new head coach. Ones we're excited about with Chip Kelly and Pete Carroll, a new quarterback in Geno Smith, but now these immense expectations. We think that these guys are going to deliver. I have a lot of enthusiasm about these players. I know that a lot of my colleagues at Fantasy Points do as well. But we've seen situations where the community gets head over heels over a potential ascending offense and gets left holding ADP failures. I don't think that's the case with Las Vegas. But any way you cut it, there is immense pressure on this offense to deliver, not with one, but with two massively drafted younger players getting steamed up in ADP. When it's all said and done, there's a chance that Ashton Genty and Brock Bowers in late August drafts are both going inside of the first round in every single format. The steam is absolutely real, and will they deliver on it?
Hey guys, it's Ryan Heath. And before I get to the most important question about the Chargers, I want to start with an easy answer. And that's just that Ladd McConkey is an amazing bet to join the elite tier at the wide receiver position this year, and he's more than worthy of your second round draft pick. McConkey was obviously incredible in the slot. He led all wide receivers in average separation score when he was lined up inside, ahead of guys like CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown. He did all that as a rookie, which is crazy. But he's also a demon from out wide. He ranked top 5 in first downs per route run from the outside, ahead of ex-receivers like Nico Collins and Mike Evans. McConkey is just one of the best route runners in the league already, and he's going to continue to play even in 2 receiver sets. Don't pass him up in your drafts, and definitely don't listen to anybody who tells you he's limited as a slot-only player. But now, on to the biggest question. Will 22nd overall draft pick Omarion Hampton take over this backfield from Najee Harris, and when? First, consider that since 2018, every running back drafted in the top 25, except for Rashad Penny, saw at least 230 touches in their first season. That already has us at the touch floor of a top 24 running back from last year, or an RB2. Second, Hampton is an elite athlete, boasting an 87th percentile speed score and a 96th percentile overall SPORK athleticism score. The only other running back ranking above the 95th percentile in SPORK to get drafted in round 1 over the last decade was Saquon Barkley. He happened to finish as the overall fantasy RB1, and he scored the most fantasy points by a rookie running back of all time. So we definitely shouldn't question the upside. It's true that Chargers OC Greg Roman has a history of deploying a committee backfield with his rookies. We saw J.K. Dobbins split time with Gus Edwards and Justice Hill for years. But Hampton profiles as a much more durable bell cow back, combining for 534 carries and 67 receptions over his final 2 years in college. And Najee Harris just isn't that imposing of an obstacle. He ranked outside the top 25 in explosive run rate and yards after contact per attempt last year. Look, Hampton is probably not going to win you your league in September. But if you can draft him and stay afloat until he takes over at some undetermined point in the middle of the season, you could easily have a top 10 running back on your hands down the stretch that you drafted in round 4 or later. That's the type of bet I'm interested in making. There are only a few players every season that truly matter in fantasy football, and Hampton is just the type of profile as a rookie who could take over a backfield late in the season that can really matter and really win you your league.
For Miami, I think the confusion for many continues to exist. Can we start with this, though, right? The Dolphins have made some choices this offseason, and I think there's a lot to look at when it's, Javon Holland leaves and Jalen Ramsey's gone and the Tyreek Hill situation's goofy. And, we've seen a lot of other players in recent years leave, and Christian Wilkins and Robert Hunt. But I think what they're trying to do is become a more inside zone, a little bit more power heavy run scheme. And I think the signing of James Daniels, the drafting and trading up for Jonas Savianaya, bringing in Larry Borum to be the swing tackle over a Kendall Lamb. They bring in 2 bigger backs in Alexander Madison and Ollie Gordon. They draft. They bring in a Y tight end and Farrell Brown. I think this team wants to be a little bit more physical up front and run the ball, right? I think that's something that we need to acknowledge. And I don't think Miami is a team that should have been willing to meet Jonnu Smith's contract demands. And I understand Jonnu Smith. He's cashing in. He had the greatest season of all time for a Miami Dolphins tight end. He wants to cash in, and he found the opportunity to do that. I don't think the Dolphins, despite how good he was last year for them, were a team based on where they're at in their life cycle to dig their heels in and give them that money. And I think they learned some hard lessons last year about all the guys that put their hands out and begged for more money, and they gave it to them, and they're probably regretting a lot of those decisions. So, yeah, I think you can look at the Dolphins and say, well, you lose Jonnu Smith. Well, would it have been equally silly for them to pay him? I think there'd have been a conversation to be had there that I don't think anyone's willing to have. I think they want to be more of an 11 personnel-based offense. They bring in Nick Westbrook-Ikine to be this power slot. Now, Darren Waller kind of falls into that line as well. I don't really have any expectations for Darren Waller out of retirement. But I think that's the direction of their offense. And I think if Tua's healthy, their offense is going to be fine. Now, that's a big if, and it's not just concussions, it's the hip, right? He's had foot injuries. It's all kinds of stuff. It does feel a little bit make or break for Mike McDaniel, and it feels like there's been a resistance to further dig their heels into that style of team that we've come to know for the Dolphins under Mike McDaniel. So I'm not super optimistic on Miami. If Tua's healthy, I think they'll be a decent team. But I almost feel like for as much as people want to clown the offense, my bigger questions are on defense.
I don't have many questions on offense. I think we know what this team is. I think you laid out the direction they're moving beautifully. I think it's a good direction. And an RPO, quick pass game offense, I think you need that downhill power element to the run game to make that work, and they're going to do it. So love everything you said there. On defense, they definitely got worse. Minka Fitzpatrick, the hot take I was going to lay out there is, for my money, I think he's the most overrated player of our generation.
Oh, of our generation. That's healthy.
Yeah,
That's healthy.
maybe. Yeah. I think that's fair for me. So their floor, I think their floor can be pretty low. If Jalen Phillips isn't right, Bradley Chubb isn't right, the pass rush struggles, they can't stop the run because Kenneth Grant's a rookie, and Benito Jones is just a dude. I think the floor could be pretty bad. The ceiling, though, I think is important. Like, I think the offense is going to be really good. If Tua's healthy, the offense should be really good. I think with the secondary the way that it is right now, Storm, Duck, Cater Co, and Artie Burns are your projected starters.
Can't do it.
With Cam Smith working. Yeah, you can't do that. So, but the ceiling should be pretty good. Like, if Phillips is healthy, Chubb is healthy, Chop Robinson, Zach Seiler, you got an elite pass rush if all those guys are ticking, which should help the corners. And you just need the defense to be average, right? Because the offense should put up points. I mean, is the ceiling 9-10 wins? Am I understating the ceiling?
No, I think your range of outcomes just went from a top 10 pick to a first round playoff bounce, right?
It's pretty wide to me.
Yeah, and that doesn't even get into like the culture conversation, the toughness conversation, what Mike McDaniel needs to prove in terms of his evolution as a coach. Like,
yeah,
there's a lot of variables here, but it could be a helpful place for them to be where expectations are lower.
Callahan, you're really in tune with fantasy, so I want to ask you about the current value of the two main Patriots running backs. Obviously, much hyped second-round pick, Travion Henderson. He's now essentially a sixth-round pick in best ball, while Ramondre Stevenson, who had one great year a couple years ago and has fallen off since, he's down to an 11th-round pick on Underdog Fantasy in best ball. Do you think that's about right, and what are your expectations for this backfield split?
So my first thought on this, Joe, is to go back to Ramondre's rookie year. When you remember, he was the rookie coming in. Damian Harris was entrenched as a starter. And about halfway through that season, their value flipped. And it wasn't just because Ramondre was playing third down back there. He was more explosive. He had better cuts and was a better pass catcher. I look at Travion Henderson, and if the vision carries over from college, he's certainly more explosive. And the pass catching numbers were as good as pretty much any backs coming out of the draft last season. So I think right now it's fair to wonder if Stevenson, as much as a starting running back, will vulture some touchdowns from the guy being drafted higher than him. But I think this is going to play out the same way that Stevenson's rookie year did. He'll start, but by the end of the year, you're looking at Henderson as the Patriots' best running back.
And so maybe a little bit of patience is needed for fantasy football, not necessarily for best ball players who can just set it and forget it. On the other hand, Callahan, we got some young wide receivers with the Patriots. Now with actually a quarterback who gives us some hope that they can produce. They drafted Kyle Williams in the third round. He was a big buzz guy down at the Senior Bowl. But you also have to keep in mind that they had a couple of young receivers last year, two rookies, Jalen Polk and Javon Baker, neither of whom did a whole lot of anything. Is there any hope for any of these young receivers? I guess you can even throw Kayshon Boutte into there to produce at a fantasy relevant level in 2025.
So, it's tough, Joe, because they're Patriots receivers just to talk about fantasy relevance. And when it gets clouded in OTAs by all the normal OTA qualifiers, you have to have no pads, right? Not totally competitive. But when they were competitive, Diggs was out, Kendrick Bourne, Kayshon Boutte, and Demario Douglas were your starters. Among those three, because Jalen Polk is still recovering from offseason shoulder surgery, Demario Douglas was far and away the best and most consistent receiver. And you could do the McDaniels history of productive slot receivers, and I think that's a compelling argument. The difference is he doesn't have quite the feel as you saw with a Wes Welker, early Julian Edelman, settling in zone, having the chemistry with the quarterback. So I think there's a runway here for Demario Douglas to get a lot of volume. PPR league should be eating up a guy like that. But as far as the guys behind him, it really is Diggs, maybe Pop, and then everybody else, because Polk, as I said, we didn't see in OTAs. But Baker, I think they can forget about. I mean, he was rolling with the scout team pretty much throughout the spring, and it's just a guy that it seems, there's a reason he fell into the 4th round, and that was it. So aside from him, it's really Diggs, Pop, and that's it.
What about Kyle Williams and what he can bring to the offense in theory?
Yeah, again, just going off of what we had in OTAs, which is not much, the thing that I noticed is he had a lot of success on outbreaking routes, and I think that's a guy whose long speed was respected. So you're talking comebacks, you're talking outs, but other than that, had real difficulty separating some deep, which when you're facing Christian Gonzalez is not a crime, by the way. And the fact that they were feeding him when he ran mostly with the second team offense, but little starts here with the first. I'm not willing to project anything. I love the skill set. This is not going to sway me either way, is what I felt in the spring, which he's a really good asset. I just don't know if you're going to see Kyle Williams as a rookie or year 2 when he's got more time, more seasoning to be able to break out the way that I think he could in the league.
We're talking about fantasy football's biggest question marks heading into the 2025 season for each and every team. And right now we're talking about the New York Jets, and I'm not going to talk about Breece Hall. I'm not going to talk about Garrett Wilson. I'm going to talk about Justin Fields and the opportunity that he's going to present drafters potentially as an ADP steal at the quarterback position. Fields is going off the board right around QB 10 in FFPC leagues. That's about 11th round ADP, and there's immense upside for him at this current valuation. Very similar price tag on Underdog, right around that QB 10 as well, which seems aggressive by drafters, but really is it? Justin Fields has been one of the elite rushing quarterbacks in terms of production throughout his NFL career. Not talking real life quarterback. We're not talking about wins and losses on a football field, but we're talking about rushing upside. And Justin Fields, at only 26 years old, has some very strong historical numbers. He's averaged 50.2 rushing yards per game. Only one of 3 quarterbacks in NFL history all time to hit that number. And with 50 games played, that's a large sample size. Lamar Jackson is number 1 at 59.9 rushing yards per game. Jaden Daniels last year, 52.4 rushing yards per game. And then Justin Fields at 50.2 rushing yards per game over 50 starts gives him an immense fantasy floor. To put that in perspective, Michael Vick only averaged 42.7 rushing yards per game throughout his career. Jalen Hurts right around 40. Cam Newton at 38. So Justin Fields is already right there. And when we talk about fantasy football production, we don't have to go back very far. Fields was the QB5 overall in points per game in 2022. He was the QB9 in points per game in 2023 in some pretty poor situations in Chicago. And then when we look at last year, and last year was a short sample size. He had 6 starts at the beginning of the season before Russell Wilson took over, but he had 5 rushing touchdowns in that span of games. And if we talk about rushing yardage, Justin Fields has the second highest rushing yardage total season in NFL history at the quarterback position. We go back to that 2022 season, and he had 1,143 rushing yards. Now, with Tanner Engstrand taking over as offensive coordinator in New York, we think we're going to get an aggressive play caller coming from the Ben Johnson tree, Dan Campbell tree. Engstrand's a first-year play caller, but the vibes are pretty strong in New York. Apparently, there's going to be a high use of RPOs in this Jets offense, and that could really help Fields shine. Again, we referenced Breece Hall. There also is Braylon Allen. There's also Isaiah Davis. So there's some talent at running back and some depth there in the Jets backfield. You also have Garrett Wilson, a clear top target for Justin Fields. Fields is in a position this year where he's a challenger to have the most rushing yardage of any single quarterback in the NFL simply by playing 17 full games based on the history that we have with Fields. If he hits an elite rushing season, you're talking about a very, very high fantasy floor for Fields, with the added bonus if he overwhelms as a passer and simply passes for a decent amount of touchdowns, then Fields could really, really, really deliver at ADP. We've got some question marks about this Jets offense. The offensive line is still developing, but back-to-back seasons of selecting an offensive lineman inside of early portion of round one, this year with Armand Membu. We referenced the touchdown passes for Fields. His tie in his career is only 17. If he's going to do something to deliver on similar 2022 numbers, we'd like to see that number go around 25 touchdown passes. A very, very tall ask, but the offensive situation in New York could be underrated, and Justin Fields could be as well. One of the most polarizing players at ADP that could have a real effect on fantasy football in 2025.
The Pittsburgh Steelers acquired DK Metcalf from the Seattle Seahawks this offseason, and they handed him a 5-year, $150 million contract. A few months later, they traded away the enigmatic George Pickens to make Metcalf the clear number one wide receiver in Pittsburgh. Metcalf reached 900 or more yards in each of his first 6 seasons, but he's coming off a career-worst 5 receiving touchdowns in his final season in Seattle. In his first 6 games last season, he averaged 9 targets per game with 3 100-yard performances before picking up an MCL injury in Week 7. He missed 2 games before coming back and averaging 5.9 targets per game with no performances of 70 or more receiving yards in his final 8 contests. He's primed for a bounce-back campaign with better touchdown luck and better health. And new quarterback Aaron Rodgers is expected to feed him the rock with just Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson behind him at wide receiver. Metcalf is a curious fit with Rodgers, though. Rodgers ranked 26th in deep throw rate among 39 quarterbacks with 200 or more attempts, and that's from our FantasyPoints data. He also ranked 32nd in yards per attempt and 36th in completion percentage on passes of 10 or more yards among 40 quarterbacks with 50 such attempts. The hope is Rodgers becomes a more efficient downfield passer working with Metcalf in Arthur Smith's new offensive system, especially with another year removed from that Achilles injury in New York. Metcalf could be among the league leaders in target share and air yard share this season, which gives him high-end wide receiver 2 potential if Rodgers proves to be an upgrade over Russell Wilson. That upside is why I am targeting DK Metcalf in the 4th round of underdog drafts and in the 5th round of FFPC drafts.
Easton, obviously, it's a new era for the Tennessee Titans, selecting Cam Ward as the number 1 overall pick as their new quarterback. You've been at mini camps, OTAs. What kind of profile do you think he will give fantasy teams as we move into his career? Maybe not just as a rookie, but going forward for those in dynasty leagues.
Yeah, I do think it's going to be a heavier passing volume offense for the Titans. They really struggled last year with the 2 guys they had rolling in and out at quarterback to, I think, play the way that Brian Callahan wants to operate offensively. He comes from a Cincinnati system where Joe Burrow runs the show and they do a lot of quick passing game. He also was a part of the twilight years for Peyton Manning when they were doing stuff in Denver that looked relatively similar. So I think a lot of the Titans offense is going to revolve around Cam Ward, not just pushing the ball downfield, but doing a lot of stuff in the quick passing game, which is going to give you a lot of PPR opportunities. I think it's going to be a heavier passing year than the Titans have had, frankly, in a while, right? Like, when was the last time they had a volume passer? Even in the best years recently, it was a lot of the Derrick Henry show. So I think in that way, the fantasy options offensively will look a little bit different this year.
So obviously, I think Calvin Ridley is as obvious a primary target as there is in the entire NFL.
No kidding.
But barring injury, there's no way he's not going to lead this team in targets. But that also means if they have a heavier passing volume offense, targets have to go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And this receiving depth chart, to me, this appears wide open. So I want you to take the floor and say, who could be the 2nd and 3rd targets for Cam Ward as a rookie here?
Yeah, well, first of all, you're absolutely right that, I think last year a lot of Calvin Ridley owners were pretty pleased with the floor that he gave them just because he did command, especially down the stretch, the majority of the volume. And this year, I don't see how that doesn't just increase. So depending on where you're getting him in your draft, he feels like a really obvious choice. beyond him, I think the rookies do have a lot of potential. In particular, the guy that I'm really bullish on is Alec Manor, out of Stanford, 4th round pick, went later in the draft than I think some of us expected him to. But maybe it's just me, man. I think he's more NFL ready than folks are giving him credit for. I've been really impressed with what we've seen from him in practice so far. I'm really excited to see what he looks like in pads once he gets to kind of throw his weight around a little bit. And for my money, he's the only true X receiver on this roster in terms of body type and skill set. So, I projected in a recent article that he's going to be a week 1 starter. If it's not week 1, it's month 1, and he's going to be involved from week 1, even if he's not technically the starter. I think that the ceiling for him is relatively high as a day 3 rookie in year 1. And if you told me somebody is kind of a surprise breakout on this team, I don't know why I wouldn't be picking him. Now, beyond him, the Titans have some questions about whether or not the other 4th round rookie, Chimere Dike out of Florida, is going to take the mantle, or they're going to be doing a lot of spreading the ball around, I think, because there's a lot of secondary and tertiary passing options. You've got Chigakonkwo and Gunnar Helm as tight ends, who I think are both going to be relatively often used in the passing game. Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears are one of the more able duos in the league when it comes to receiving backfields. And then you've got some veterans, in particular Tyler Lockett. And I might be a little bit low on him. I definitely am low on him to consensus. I just see a guy like that who is a franchise staple like he was in Seattle, where he means so much more than just the contribution on the field. And for after years, a team to say, we're free and clear of this guy, go on your way, that usually to me indicates the beginning of the end. So I'll believe it when I see it for him to be a contributor. I think he'll be a contributor early because the one thing that he is, great at and notorious for is staying healthy and staying on the field. So I think he'll be out there and he'll be available. But the goal is for a guy like Chimere Dike to kind of take over. And I think that they want to use him a lot differently than he was used in Florida. I think that he's going to be a big slot option for this team. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he's somebody that you see more volume in that short passing game going his way than he ever saw in Florida. So it's really the Calvin Ridley show. And then beyond that, the rookie receivers are the guys that I'm most excited about.
And just really quick, in terms of running the football, is there any reason to anticipate anything different than the split we saw from Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears last year when both are healthy?
Right. Well, that's the thing, when both are healthy, because Spears got knocked out 4 different times last year with an ankle, a hamstring, and 2 concussions down the stretch, really never got into any kind of rhythm. And so Pollard, especially down the stretch when he was hurt too with an ankle, was having to gut it out and played some high volume but inefficient games. Now, Pollard did get to 1,000 yards and scored 5 touchdowns, so he was a decent floor running back in terms of fantasy. I think this year they're hoping to have him play less snaps, which should in turn allow him to be a more efficient runner. And if the Titans are a better offense in general, then I think there will be more than 5 rushing touchdowns to go around. So I could see the touchdown production increasing as well.